Hello everyone and happy International Women's Day to all of you. I'm Shada Islam from Debating Europe and this is Ask Georgieva. It's a discussion with Kristalina Georgieva, who is the Chief Executive Officer at the World Bank, now based in Washington, but until 2017 also a very, very important and powerful European Commissioner. We're going to ask Kristalina Georgieva many questions about what it is to be a woman in today's world, what it is like to be a woman in conflict, in war, but also in peace. And to take this conversation forward, we also have questions from our community, from our Debating Europe community, but also from students here in the studio. They are Estelle, Chloe, Natasha, and Tillman. So before we start this conversation, I'd like to ask you, Kristalina, to say a few words about your priorities at the World Bank on this International Women's Day.
Let me start by joining you in wishing Happy International Women's Day to all women and men watching. And my first message is that gender equality is good for everyone. No country, no community, no family can succeed limping on one leg, tapping into the talent of only half of the people we have. When I think of the life journey I have been through, the most important lesson I learned is that for my generation, it was normal women to work twice as hard as men just to be equal. What I wish on this day is for the generation of my daughter, my granddaughter, to be equal just because they are. I was for many years one of these women who would think that feminism is actually bad for women because it pigeonholes us, that we should be gender blind. And then I realized that by taking that position, I was not serving women, especially in the developing world, that are discriminated against. But women are discriminated also in the rich world. We published at the World Bank a very interesting report called Women, Business and the Law. And it studies laws and how they affect women. Guess what? In almost 150 countries, there is some law that is actually discriminating against women. And what it means is that the world as a whole is not reaching its full potential. There was a study done that says if we were to wake up tomorrow in a world of 100% gender equality, it would be a staggering at least 12 trillion dollars. This is like more than 10 trillion euros richer world. So we should be thinking of gender equality as a matter of rights, but also as a matter of well-being and prosperity. And those of us, people, women like me, that have gotten up in the high corridors of power, every day to remember we have a responsibility to strive for gender equality everywhere. My duty.
Right. Kristalina, thank you very much. So there is, and you have to acknowledge that, a new momentum. Women are mobilized, women are deployed, they're in the streets, they're marching, and you've talked about the economic benefits as well. But in our Debating Europe community, there are questions, very basic questions, I have to say. So Ina from Ireland has asked, important question, I think, to answer, Kristalina, would promoting gender equality really make a difference? Or would the problems remain and the women would just add to the complexity of the issues?
Well, I'm not going to pretend that women being equal means that we are solving all the world's problems. We are not. But we are solving one problem, and it is the problem of not allowing the talents of girls and women and the rights of girls and women to be fully respected, fully tapped into. What I found over many years is that we women are our worst enemy. we are actually very critical of ourselves. We don't put ourselves forward the way men will. I'll tell you a little story. Ina, what's the name?
Yes, Ina.
Ina, a little story for Ina. I was interviewing a man and a woman, and they were putting their best foot forward for a job. They were both short of the requirements of the job. The man said, look at me, I meet almost all requirements, and I'm bringing my wonderful personality to you. And the woman said, well, I'm not so sure. I don't really meet all requirements. Maybe there is somebody better than me. So we have that issue of making sure that we recognize the difference between men and women. We also see it in terms of building consensus. Women tend to be more open to find a solution. They are saying, okay, let me hear your point of view and your point of view, and maybe if we all adjust our positions, we can come to an end. I was Commissioner for Budget. I negotiated EU budget. I'm the only one that finished negotiations actually a week before schedule because of the way I would approach these negotiations. Let's find a common ground. So women are bringing, if we are serious about gender equality, we actually will make our decision-making process better, our management of whatever assets we have better, and we, of course, would be a more peaceful society. And if I may just add one more point, and we need to remember that for us, for women in the kind of a richer world, discrimination is about pay, sometimes it is harassment, sometimes it's lack of opportunities. For women in some developing countries, sometimes it is a matter of life or death. And certainly for many girls, it is being deprived of the very basic choice to choose who to marry, when to marry. Today, in one day, 41,000 girls before the age of 18 will get married. 15 million girls every year. Not to the men of their choice very often without having the maturity, physical maturity and mental maturity to be in a marriage. So there are very painful problems that, yes, today we are more open to address. And when we address them, I wholeheartedly believe we make our world, our environment, our communities a better place for everybody, for men and women, or yes, for women and men.
Yes, Kristalina, thank you very much for bringing in the global angle, because often here we tend to focus on the priorities and the concerns we have, but the real challenges facing the world outside Brussels and Europe and Washington. Thank you very much indeed. Tilman, we're talking about the need for equality. You're a guy. What do you think?
Well, I mean,
are you converted?
First of all, obviously, yes. I think the topic of gender equality remains high on the agenda and should be high on the agenda. It's extremely important, and it has really two dimensions to it. I mean, it's not only about women, but it's really about equality. That's at least how I understand the term gender equality. Yeah. So you mentioned already the rich world. We see at the European Union, I mean, you know yourself in the College of the European Commission, there was no gender equality. Mm-hmm. We look at the European labor market and we see that there's a mismatch in the labor market. Mm-hmm. Women would like to work more sometimes, especially after the first child, where their wages start to stagnate. And men would like to do more care work. And we have a mismatch which we do not address. And of course, in the developing world, we have gender equality is a lot about fragility, for example, in a wake of a disaster. So the topic cannot be left aside. It has to be high on the agenda, and it's very, very important. I'm glad that we talk about it today.
Right. Thank you very much. Let me take another question from Debating Europe. Daniela from Germany, also like you, Tilman, from Germany. So she says, also something very important, I think, that we will not really get change until we have an equal 50-50 share.
Could I first say how glad I'm to hear what Tilman said, and that gives me hope that my dream for the future generation of equality is going to be a reality, because it would take he for she as well as she for she for that to happen. And yes, I do believe that we have to strive for equality. When I was in the Commission, I was in charge of human resources, and I set up a target together with President Juncker that we would have 40% women at the top. Why not 50%? Daniela would ask. Because we were so low that we needed to build up the capacity to get higher. And even 40% sounded to many people like impossible. It is going to be met. I went to the World Bank, and there they were in a better shape, so I said 50-50. And actually striving for equality, it starts with equal access to education. In many countries, it is easier for boys than it is for girls. And then equal access to jobs and opportunities to do jobs not in a gender-painted manner that, you know, the women are the teachers and the men are the engineers, but make sure that there is equality. And of course, equality of pay. And shame on us in Europe. We still have 16% difference between men and women in pay. And then, of course, equality in terms of how we look after our families. What you said is so true, that both men and women should have flexi time at work so they can take care of their families and children. And they both should have a chance to contribute to that incredible pleasure to be a parent. So there is a lot, Daniela, there is a lot we need to do. And I want to tell you something that you should be actively lobbying on. And it is that question of equality in the marketplace at labor in terms of how we are treated. And what I'm asking you is to check your salary level. Ask how your male colleagues are paid. Make sure that you are equal. Because we tend to not ask, so we women are part of the problem. We have to be part of the solution just by asking this simple question: am I treated like my colleague next door who happens to be a man?
And this question of actually having power in numbers, that things won't really change unless there are an impressive number of women asking for change, right?
Yep, absolutely. And on this 50-50, of course, it may be 40-60, 45-55, and it may go one way or the other. The whole point is that unless we see in the boardroom more or less the same number of women, and by the way, women are very conscientious. We look at the World Bank, we do studies of financial accountability. Guess what? When women borrow money, they're more likely to pay back. We want the women at all levels, but especially we want them in politics. And there we are far, far from equality. There are so very few women heads of governments today. It is changing, but not fast enough. So what would drive change? Of course, conversations like this contribute, but mostly women stand up and be counted. Don't shy away from stepping up.
Thank you very much. Estelle, do you have a comment on this?
Yeah, actually, I'd like to jump on the ratio that you're talking about, 50-50 in the World Bank and 40% as well in the European Commission. I think it's really important for two reasons. First, as having role models for women, you were talking about capacity. It's important to show women that we need them at the table, and we need them as well to represent women, to represent their issues, because we couldn't have men talking about like problems that women encounter, and women are 50% of the population more or less, so I think it's really important to have them as well.
They're actually more than 50% because of longevity.
That's
women
right.
kind of live a little longer. And yes, we should be striving for that. And do it recognizing, and I want to stress this point, that it is good for women, but it is also good for men. So it's a win-win situation. Actually, I always think of what have I learned interacting with women? Well, one thing is discipline. Women tend to be more responsive. In my early days at the World Bank, in my first tour at the World Bank, at that time, President Wolfensohn once comes to me. We are in a very difficult moment, a lot of work to do. He looks at me and says, "Kristalina, so much work to do and so very few women to do it. And we need to remember that. We are not talking about charity, we are not talking about just being nice, we are talking about our societies being better problem solvers and more effective.
Right. Let me take another question now. This is from India, Kristalina. This is Nili from India. And she says that millions of girls, and you've said it yourself, are not in school. In many parts of the emerging world, they're not in school. So how can these women have that kind of skill, capacity, confidence to become vital parts of society?
Well, this is a problem to be addressed relentlessly, to make sure that girls are in school and they stay there and they learn. And we can only do it by mobilizing communities, national leaders, and the world as a whole to address it. And what I can say is that when there is this determination, it actually happens. Bangladesh faced a very serious problem of girls not being in school. And then the World Bank worked with Bangladesh to create a small stipend program for boys and girls, and then to make enrollment, especially of the girls, a celebration of the whole community. So what happened was we got up enrollment of girls, and then these girls becoming young women with education and good skills became the backbone of the textile industry that pulled Bangladesh from poverty. So now we have a situation in which a combination of good family planning, the school enrollment, and then jobs that are appropriate, not only appropriate, but more appropriate for women, it contributed to the country's kind of pull out of poverty. But it took that sense of celebrating girls' education, the fathers being the drivers of it. I don't know whether you have ever met Malala's father. He is a champion for girls. And you know, somebody was asking me, how can we make that more massive? And I was thinking, well, maybe we can clone him and spread him all over. But actually, just being sure that we involve families and we involve the fathers of the girls. And I would finish with one. I'm mindful of time, but I want to tell you a very important story about Afghanistan.
Please.
15 years ago, the World Bank re-engaged with Afghanistan. And at that time, there were only 1 million children in schools, and 90+% were boys. Today, there are 8 million children in schools, 40% are girls. And I just want to say that it takes the dedication of resources, the engagement over 15 years, but it also takes the courage and perseverance of the girls and their families. And sometimes these girls go to school putting their lives at risk, but they go to school. And that is what I really want us today to celebrate on Women's International Day.
Absolutely. Natasha, do you have a point to make here?
Yes, absolutely. So thank you for this comment on education, and it's true, it's kind of obvious that education is a crucial element for development. And I think sometimes people are quite impatient because it's a long-term project and the returns are not fast, so you have to be patient, and as well as the inclusive aspect of education and the fact that it can bring opportunities and economic opportunities for the whole country, as you mentioned in Bangladesh. I think it's also important for girls to be in school, to also have good information in developing countries about their fertility and their contraception, because I think that can be, a big concern in terms of demographic pressure, and it has to be addressed. And probably the best way would be education. And
well, I mean, you're so right. When we get girls in school and they stay there, they marry later in life, and they usually have fewer children. They space the time between births. They also are more likely to have healthier children. And so the children would then develop their intellectual capabilities, boys and girls. they would be more productive members of society. But if I can say one thing about access to family planning, it is actually crucial for so many countries where the pressure of population growth is just incredible. And it makes it impossible for countries to pull themselves out of poverty. Because take Niger, Niger grows 3%, economic growth 3%, population growth 3.2%. What happens is you actually produce more people in extreme poverty, not less. So to think of access to health services, to family planning services for girls and women is actually care for the prosperity of a whole country. And I know that in the so-called West, we sometimes say, oh, this is culturally insensitive, we cannot talk about population growth. I'll tell you a little story. My country, I'm a Bulgarian. My country, Bulgaria, and Kenya in 1960 were next to each other in the population table. Bulgaria had 7.9 million, Kenya had 8.1. Today, Bulgaria has 7.3, demographic problem. Kenya has 47 million. Yeah. So when I talk about this, I always tell people, I cannot imagine my country with 47 million people. I cannot. I cannot. So we have to be much more mindful that by shying away of talking about population pressures, we are actually shying away from talking about extreme poverty and the way to get out of it. And this is unethical. This is immoral.
In fact, I think many leaders of emerging countries want to be told to take that action. Let me go back to debating Europe for a second. So we have Aussie on Australia, and this is about peace. And in the world we live in today, Kristalina, you'll agree that we need to talk a bit more about peace. And the question is really about feminine traits and how they can help in establishing, managing peace.
Well, one of the big demands that are being placed today on bringing women forward is about peace negotiations and women's voices being heard. Unfortunately, in most peace negotiations, women are absent.
That's right.
They are very often the most dramatic victims of war. They are also those that are most likely to have that reasoned argument why we have to put the arms down, but they don't have a seat at the table. And what I would argue is that there has to be, in every internationally supported peace negotiations, there has to be a demand that women are part of it. And I think even in societies that are culturally, for whom this is more difficult, there are ways to find the voices of women to penetrate in this conversation. I have seen, and also the international responses to crisis, we have to be much more gender sensitive to how help has to reach out people. I will give you two examples. One, camps. Well, we ought to make sure that there is light, that women are able to get safely to the bathrooms, and that there is special attention given to women-led households. If you only let it to natural selection,
that's right,
you penalize women, you keep them out. And a second very important example is when we are in a crisis environment, to recognize that you have to provide a safe space for women to be able to speak, to tell us what do they worry about, what is it that they need. And very often what we think they need is not what they need. The whole question of dignity, it applies so much to especially to women and girls. And dignity, it has so many aspects, from health aspects to these special needs of adolescent girls. All of this we have to think about. How do you know it? by talking to women. If they're not there, if you don't talk to them, how do you know? You don't.
Absolutely right. And we have a UN Security Council resolution on women in peace, and we have to actually implement it.
Yep.
Chloe, do you have any thoughts on this?
I would like to bounce on that, yes. So the question involved this idea of feminine traits. I think that another danger that we should avoid maybe would be to essentialize women and like imagining that, for example, empathy and collaboration are only women's traits. It's theoretically, it is the case. But I think that women are not necessarily like this magical solution that we think on. We should think of women as, well, complex beings that can also, of course, be strong and go forward. And that on the other hand, these feminine traits are kind of balanced with masculine traits that can also be, that are generally glorified, but must be and can be very toxic for men themselves. This whole idea that men absolutely have to be strong, to speak loud, to occupy the space and to be dominant should be fought too, I think, by gender equality programs and projects.
You're very right. I mean, obviously, there is also distance between my generation and your generation. My generation, professional women, few and far between. And of course, women at the top, even fewer and far further. So for my generation, you actually do need to every day remind yourself, you're good, you can do things, you can do this and you can do that. And I certainly hope that this necessity to, you said glorify, but you know, to present the qualities women bring that otherwise may not be there. I hope that this would go away. It would not be necessary because it would be there. But let me tell you, not there yet, not there yet. I have been with Saudi women, fabulous women, one nuclear engineer by training, another one professor with very, very strong analytical skills. But do you meet them? No, the only place I can meet them is closed doors in the house. We have to recognize that there is a whole accordion of issues we have to address, and in some places they are more mute, and in some places they're more dramatic. My professor of statistics used to say that you can put your head in the refrigerator, your feet in the oven, your temperature would be average, but you would be dead. So in that sense, my message to you is that, yes, we have to calibrate. You're absolutely right. We cannot put uniform to these issues. But in some places, they are as dramatic as women have to stand up and be counted. And in other places, there is more already kind of gender equality is almost there.
Yes. So we're reaching the end of our Ask Georgieva session, but there is one question that I'd like to put to you, Kristalina. João from Portugal. And he thinks we're at the stage where all significant barriers for women have already fallen.
Aha. Hey, João. Guess what? Not quite. Not quite. But I'm glad you think so, because that gives me hope that we are making really good progress. And I certainly would like to be not too far in the future in the conversation when I would be you and I would say, gender equality, it's done, forget it. But not just yet.
Not just yet. So thank you very much indeed, Kristalina, for this fabulous Ask Georgieva. We've talked about, I think, a lot of things that concern women of my age and your age, our age, on International Women's Day. We've talked of peace, work, education, life at home, and life in the workplace. So thank you very much for listening, for watching us. Thank you very much to the students who've been here, and above all, thank you very much to Kristalina Georgieva.
Thank you to the students. Well done. Good questions.
And all I would say is, Ask Georgieva. I would like to change it to Stay Georgieva. Thank you.
Thank you.